There are many ways to play Magic the Gathering, from Commander to Pioneer, Pauper to Vintage. There is truly a Magic the Gathering format for everyone. If you're watching this video, chances are you've found at least one format that you really love. You probably know a lot about it too. With each new Magic the Gathering set that gets released, and there sure are a lot of them lately, you scour the previews for cards that would be perfect in your beloved deck. You're intimately familiar with the highs and lows of your favorite format. You have your beloved favorite cards and your least liked cards, and you could debate why your favorites are indeed your favorites and better than those you dislike for hours upon hours. But what about the formats you don't play? Chances are there's at least one other format that would be just as rewarding to dive into as your favorite format. Maybe you already have an idea of which format that is. Maybe you're a Commander player who's been interested in Pioneer or Modern. Maybe up till now you've mostly drafted, but you're curious about putting the cards you've opened together to make a constructed deck. For many Magic the Gathering players, the prospect of exploring a new Magic format is a daunting one. Decks seem so streamlined and solved, or the opposite, there are too many options, and players seem so good. The gameplay is just too fast-paced, or you don't know how to navigate the switch from 2 to 4 player games, or vice versa. How do you go from Commander to 1v1? Going from a position of someone with great format knowledge to one of a relative novice is scary. Putting yourself out there is even scarier. So what's the secret to overcoming these perceived obstacles and figuring out how to play a new Magic the Gathering format and fall in love with it? Well, I'm not telling. Just kidding. The truth is, a lot of those formats aren't actually as inaccessible as they seem at first. All of them have entry points, and the players who play them are always thrilled to welcome newcomers and show them the ropes. The secret to overcoming intimidation is information. The more you learn about a format, the less unfamiliar it will feel, and the more prepared you'll feel to dive in and explore it. This video will be a guide to learning how to play a new Magic the Gathering format. Let's begin with prep work. You can learn a lot about a format before ever touching a Magic card. The first thing I recommend doing if you're curious about another format is to read up on what the metagame looks like. Websites like EDHREC and MTG Goldfish are excellent resources for compiling metagame data and giving you a frame of reference to start building your knowledge of the format. MTG Goldfish's metagame breakdown page in particular is a godsend. Every constructed Magic format from Standard to Vintage has its own page where you can find deck lists, tournament results, and even, for many formats, a budget deck selection. Hey look, there's even Pauper decks! But if, let's say, you're interested in showing up to a local Modern tournament, then the Modern metagame page will not only give you information on the various decks you're likely to face, as well as give you ideas for what sort of deck you might like to play. The tournament results section will tell you which decks have been doing particularly well, and if you click on a specific deck and scroll down to the bottom of the page, you can see older versions of the deck to see how it evolved over time. At first, you may find your eyes glazing over a little bit. There's a lot of information there, and you may not be able to make sense of it all immediately. That's okay. Even very basic analysis is useful in this early stage. Observations as simple as, oh, okay, so this deck plays a lot of non-creature spells, or aha, so this deck seems to care a lot about its own graveyard, are valuable information to gather as you're beginning your journey into a new format. By this point, you may have even started to get a feel for the types of decks that appeal to you. Maybe you love your Corvold Fey-Cursed King deck in Commander, and thus are thrilled to find there's a Jund Aristocrats deck in Pioneer that plays 3 or 4 copies of the powerful dragon. Maybe you play the Goblin Combo deck in Pauper, and have fallen in love with the modern Goblin Combo deck that can Goldfish a win as early as turn 3. If you're a longtime Constructed or Commander player interested in showing up to a draft at Friday Night Magic for the first time, there are a ton of resources for getting a feel for a limited environment beforehand so that you're not flying by the seat of your pants into the draft. Virtually every limited content creator puts out a set review for each new set that gets released. Spending about half an hour or so reading a set review before heading out for Friday Night Magic is a great way to get a little familiarity with the cards that you'll see going around the draft table. And if the idea of draft is something you've always been interested in but don't know where to start, you can always start with my video, The New Player's Guide to Learning How to Draft. Speaking of content creation, the other preparation I recommend before jumping into gameplay is checking out a content creator who plays the format you'd like to try. Regardless of which format you're interested in, there's going to be a Twitch streamer, podcaster, article writer, or YouTuber with hours upon hours of content that you can consume. Watching or listening to someone who's well-versed in the format play games or discuss strategy is an excellent method for learning from their expertise and experiences. And if you've spent some time looking at deck lists on MTG Goldfish, you'll find it particularly rewarding seeing those cards in action. You may find there are synergies that play out in practice that you hadn't even considered just by looking at a list of cards on a screen. Pulling up the deck list that streamer is playing with while they play and referring to it throughout their matches is a great way to start drawing connections and further your understanding both of the deck and the format as a whole. If you're watching a YouTube video or Twitch VOD, essentially any medium where you're able to press pause, a great trick to start getting a feel for the gameplay and strategy of the deck you're watching is to periodically pause the video that you're watching when it's the content creator's turn, examine the board, and decide what you would do if you were in their position. Once you've come to a decision, press play, then see if the player you're watching takes the same line as you would have. If they don't, try to figure out why they made a different decision than you. Over time, you'll get more and more comfortable making these decisions, and when it's you in the pilot seat at your local game store, you'll be ready. Eventually, if you're like literally every other Magic the Gathering player, you're probably going to want to start playing some games of Magic the Gathering yourself. There's a lot of ways to get started here. If you have a friend who is entrenched in the format, chances are they'd be thrilled to lend you a deck to jam some games together. Maybe they're even up for letting you take it for a spin at your local game store. If you don't have a friend who plays the format that you're interested in, maybe you have a friend who's up for trying that format out for the first time with you. If that's the case, a great way to start to get some experience playing that format is by proxying up a few decks and battling them against each other. This way, you get to try stuff out before financially committing to anything. Honestly, if you don't feel a strong need to play in a sanctioned tournament, then you could stick to proxying and playing at your kitchen table forever and not spending any money. If you do feel ready to play with your own real cards, but the prospect of dropping a stack of cash on a deck all at once is daunting, that's understandable. For several formats, there are pre-constructed decks you can pick up. These tend to be a variety of quality, from excellent to just satisfactory. And if none of the available precons appeal to you, or the format you're interested in doesn't have precons, you can also slowly buy your way into the deck you're interested in over time. Maybe you can trade some of the extra staples from the format that you already played as a way to begin building decks in this new format. Or you might even go so far as to take apart one of the decks from that format that you don't play as much anymore. If you have your own idea for a sweet new deck, you can of course start there. But you might find more success in brewing if you begin with a deck that already exists first. Don't be afraid to net deck, playing someone else's deck list, essentially. While perhaps not quite as exciting as playing a deck that you've constructed yourself, can still teach you a lot. Developing an understanding of the fundamentals of deck building in the format will provide you with valuable tools for when it comes time to brew your own deck. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, the big green root of all evil elephant. Capitalism. I mean the cost of building a new deck. A big reason for the inaccessibility of many formats is cost. I've talked about this many times on my channel, but it's difficult to talk about the subject of getting into a new format without bringing it up again. I mentioned Vintage at the top of this video, but let's not kid ourselves here. Most of you, and indeed most of everyone, myself included, won't be able to buy into Vintage ever. But did you know a place exists where Vintage is actually cheaper to play than Modern? That's right, Magic Online, a place where most Vintage decks cost around $500 compared to the many tens of thousands of dollars they would cost in paper. Because of the client's long history and because there's no reserve list for digital cards, Vintage on Magic Online is many orders of magnitude more accessible than even paper Modern. If you've ever wanted to demonic tutor for Ancestral Recall, you can, virtually at least. Magic Online also brings with it the opportunity to subscribe to a card rental service to play the more expensive formats. Maybe you can't buy an $800 Magic deck, but spending about $40 to $50 a month to play pretty much any deck you want whenever you want is a lot easier to make work in your budget. These services are also a great way to get a feel for what kind of deck you might like to play in paper events, since you can freely swap between decks within your rental limit and try out a wide swath of the format. Though not quite costing the same as a down payment on a new house as Vintage is, Legacy is still similarly inaccessible to many players. It's not uncommon, though, for an LGS to run a 10-proxy Legacy tournament so new players can give the format a try. Proxying 4 Volcanic Island, 4 Force of Will, and 2 Force of Negation, for instance, brings the cost of Legacy Izzet Delver, the best deck in the format currently, down from $4,500 to only about $600 to $700. That's still too steep a price for many players, but if you're an Izzet Murktide player in Modern, you probably have most of that $700 already. The last step to getting into what will hopefully become your new favorite format is very simple. Just show up and play. It might be scary at first, and at first, you might not do a lot of winning, but I guarantee the vast majority of players you will encounter will be thrilled to do their part in making your first foray into a sanctioned event in the format a pleasant experience. Don't beat yourself up if you don't 4-0 your first event. What matters most is that you put yourself out there and hopefully you made a friend or two who you'll see at your next event. The road is long, and it's not about winning, it's about learning and getting better each time you show up and play. And also, it's about having fun. So I hope very much you are able to explore many different formats in many different parts of Magic the Gathering, and I hope very much this video has been of some help to you. You can help me out just by remembering to subscribe, leaving a comment, hitting that like button, or watching another video on this channel. I have a large library of just about every format for you to peruse and hopefully use to your success.
Next time on Shuffle Up and Play.
Rhystic Studies, Spice 8 Rack. I've brought Pauper decks. I will have you know that Spice 8 Rack is my favorite Magic the Gathering bread tuber.
Because I be making that bread.
Oh yeah, baby!
Where are your fairies?
Yeah, we know all about it.
What am I gonna do?
Do you need land or something?
I really need land.
Super far behind here in this game, and I drew one of my best outs. One of my best snuff outs.
Oh, you hear that? That's the sound of the proletariat rising,
Let's
baby.
go, baby.
That's the
We
sound
are the
of it.
union.
You got nothing to lose but your chains, baby, and I just melted them with